Almost immediately after Malthus published the first short version of his ideas in 1798, his argument seized the public imagination and provoked a debate that has never really ended to this day. For example, Charles Dickens became one of his highest profile early critics. In 1843, Dickens put what he interpreted as Malthus's hard-hearted philosophy into the mouth of his famous character Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. Early in the story, Scrooge gets into an argument with a couple of his colleagues who ask him to donate money for the poor. He tells them he already supports prisons and workhouses. "I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry," he says. "I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there." "Many can't go there, and many would rather die," replies one of the men. "If they would rather die," said Scrooge, "they had better do it and decrease the surplus population." As we will see, this concept of a surplus population appears at the heart of Malthus's understanding of the universal human condition. For more than 2 centuries now, countless scholars have analyzed, attacked, and defended the basic argument. But why did Malthus write this little tract a few years after the American and French revolutions had shaken the world around him? We can find obvious hints about his motive in the early pages of his first introduction. There he mentions the writings of some of his contemporaries, who since have become known as the Utopian socialists. In his own England, these included William Godwin, who in addition to his own work will be remembered for his daughter Mary, who married the poet Shelley and then eventually wrote her own novel, Frankenstein. William Godwin's most famous book, Enquiry Concerning Political Justice and Its Influence on Morals and Happiness, appeared in 1793, 5 years before the first edition of the essay by Malthus. Godwin argued that badly organized political and economic rules and institutions perverted the basic goodness of people and produced all the troubles of the world as we know it. Logically, this means that if we could repair these rules and institutions, we might remove all the trouble and create a perfect society. A couple of years after Godwin's Enquiry appeared in print, in 1795, a respected French mathematician named Nicolas de Condorcet published another study mentioned by Malthus, his Sketch for a Historical Picture of the Progress of the Human Spirit, while he was hiding from French revolutionaries who eventually would throw Condorcet in jail for criticizing them and who may have murdered him in his prison cell. Condorcet believed that progress in science, human rights, and justice all go hand in hand, so that if we promote any of these, we help to make progress in all of them. Godwin and Condorcet then both suggested that it might be possible to create a perfect human society through the application of science and reason. Malthus doesn't buy Godwin's argument that if we could just fix up the badly designed human institutions that pervert the soundness of human nature, we might create a perfect society. If he had lived another 2 centuries, Malthus might have agreed instead with singer-songwriter Huey Lewis that there ain't no living in a perfect world, there ain't no perfect world anyway. Malthus even makes fun of Godwin's suggestion of creating human perfection on the 3rd page of his first chapter.
A writer may tell me that he thinks man will ultimately become an ostrich. I cannot properly contradict him, but before he can expect to bring any reasonable person over to his opinion, he ought to show that the necks of mankind have been gradually elongating, that the lips have grown harder and more prominent, that the legs and feet are daily altering their shape, and that hair is beginning to change into stubs of feathers. Until the probability of so wonderful a conversion can be shown, it is surely lost time and lost eloquence to expatiate on the happiness of man in such a state, to describe his powers both of running and of flying, to paint him in a condition where all narrow luxuries would be condemned, where he could be employed only in collecting the necessities of life, and where, consequently, each man's share of labor will be light and his portion of leisure ample.
Immediately after comparing the utopia of the socialists to turning people into ostriches, Malthus presents us the fundamental reason, or rather the 2 fundamental reasons, that he feels he must reject the utopian social ideal of creating a perfect society. These 2 problems appear to him to be based in human nature itself.
I think I may fairly make 2 postulata. First, that food is necessary for the existence of man. Secondly, that the passion between the sexes is necessary and will remain nearly in its present state.
Maybe these two assumptions by Malthus sound familiar to you. They're not original to Malthus. For example, they restate the basic principles suggested by Giovanni Botero more than 100 years earlier for the greatness of cities, the virtue nutritive and the virtue generative. If you're willing to accept these two assumptions, says Malthus, he will show you why and how it is impossible to create a perfect world for ourselves. Just because we might be willing to agree that people always need food to live, and that what Malthus called the passion between the sexes is as strong today as ever in human history, why should these two facts translate into his conclusion that the utopian socialist perfection of mankind is impossible? This conclusion actually follows not just from what he calls his first two postulates, but from a third assumption that he makes, namely the relative power or capacity of these two forces to increase. Of all the principles of human behavior set down by scholars across the ages, these words of the Reverend Malthus from the first 1798 version of his Essay on the Principle of Population must rank with the most familiar.
Population, when unchecked, increases in a geometrical ratio. Subsistence increases only in an arithmetical one. A slight acquaintance with numbers will show the immensity of the first power in comparison with the second. By that law of our nature which makes food necessary to the life of man, the effects of these two unequal powers must be kept equal. This implies a strong and constantly operating check on population from the difficulty of subsistence. This difficulty must fall somewhere and must necessarily be severely felt by a large portion of mankind. Among plants and animals, its effects are waste of seed, sickness, and premature death. Among mankind, misery and vice.
Before we accept Malthus's argument against the utopian socialists, then, we must examine the evidence for these two assumptions that he makes about potential growth rate.